So if I'm taking on a pilot with 20,000 hours and who experience on the aircraft, the training that he will receive will clearly be different from somebody who's got 200 or 300 hours. So fundamentally, the airline will monitor the progress of the individual through their simulator training, which will include testing, and then they'll go through the process of line training. And line training is designed to look at the performance of the individual on the line. And again, that's tailored.
But let's go back to this key issue. One of the terms of reference of this inquiry is whether we should go down the path of the United States Federal Aviation Administration Extension Act of 2010, where there should be 1,500 hours for a large capacity passenger aircraft, basically jets, anything more than 50 or 100 seats, a large capacity aircraft, such as the aircraft that Tiger flies around the country. Should there be some minimum threshold? Is the 300 hours that another airline's been proposing, or for a cadet scheme, as low as 150, 200 hours, as soon as you've got your commercial pilot's licence, you could technically be in the right-hand seat as part of a cadet program. Where do you draw the line before you have one of your aircraft, a person in the right-hand seat?
Maybe I could just add something. I think, firstly, from our perspective, this is a hypothetical at this stage because Tiger doesn't have a cadet scheme and we're not proposing a cadet scheme here in Australia. We currently have a threshold of 2,000 hours, as I mentioned, for the first officers. I think the point we're trying to make is that it's a balance between the two, is that there needs to be appropriate, vigorous, fit-for-purpose training that gives you candidates and pilots that are of the right standard to give your example, that they don't make the mistake when the weather's bad and things are not going well. Whether that's an arbitrary hours number or whether it's a combination of an hours number and appropriate training that gives satisfaction for the competency, I think we're saying it's probably a combination of the two. And I don't think we're in a position right now to say 1,500 is the right number because of those other components that we'd want to build in. So I think maybe the easiest way is perhaps we could follow up with you. We haven't, because we haven't got a cadet scheme, we haven't as a corporation said, okay, it's got to look like this. It's certainly something we're looking at.
No, I understand, but if you could, but at the moment you've got a minimum of 2,000 hour requirement for a first officer. Is that something that you tell CASA, or is that just an internal thing within the organisation?
I believe that's a company.
Yes, just internal.
So there's no requirement for you to say to CASA, by the way, our minimum requirement for the right-hand seat is 2,000 hours.
No, it's a company decision.
Right. And there are no plans to change that for your operations, a minimum of 2,000?
No.
And that's something that you would, if you did, how would regulators know, for instance?
Well, it's not something that's regulated, but we would consider that within the context of our safety system to understand what I think that we introduced 2,000 hours for a reason, and we would need to understand within the context of our safety system as whether it was reasonable and appropriate to move away from that number.
If hypothetically, if CASA regulations change to say if you're going to go below whatever your benchmark is, whether it's 2,000, 3,000, 1,500, 1,000, whatever it is, that you'd have to just let them know as a matter of course, you wouldn't have a difficulty with that.
We would do a risk assessment, a thorough risk assessment, what the risk was to our business, as we do if there's any business change. That's a process that we go through, and we would share that with CASA.
Well, your question says that, we would notify.
That wouldn't be an unreasonable thing. Yeah, sure. Do you have pay for training for your pilots?
Paid for training?
Pay for training in the sense that, there are some airlines where the pilots have a debt with the airline and they have to pay off that debt for their training.
No.
In terms of endorsement.
I'll just expand, if I may, that basically a pilot needs to join us with an A320 type rating. So there is a cost to the pilot, but that isn't managed through the organisation. It's a simple qualification.
So there's no indentured arrangement or any line arrangement between Tiger and the pilot. So they've got to come ready with a licence. Can I just go to the issue of fatigue management? And there we've heard evidence in relation to back-off clock operations, both Singapore, Darwin, Singapore with another airline, and from the east coast to Perth, and there have been some complaints from pilots in relation to that. Does Tiger have back-off clock operations from the west coast to the east coast and vice versa?
Yes, we do. Tim, would you like to answer?
And I guess further to that, what fatigue management systems do you operate? FAID is one, but there are other. I think Virgin operates with a number of measures. How do you manage the issue of fatigue, and because it's been an issue other pilots have raised?
I haven't really been able to give you any autobiographical detail myself, but I'm a pilot and I'm a former policeman, so I like checklists and I like evidence. So, in terms of our
I won't call you governor or anything.
So, in terms of our safety system, there are 7 elements in the system, which, and if you look at the safety system itself or any element within the safety system, you should be able to identify these 7 items. First of all, there's management commitment. Secondly, there's the safety culture. Third, a system of reporting, a system of investigation, hazard identification, risk assessment, and training. So that's I guess the checklist to which we apply to any safety items that come up. So, in terms of the evidence to support that in relation to fatigue, are we committed? Yes, we are. We say we're committed, but have we done anything about it? Well, last year we introduced a rostering protocol for our cabin crew. It's fairly basic, but it puts some rules around the way that we manage the.
Could you provide a copy of that protocol?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And we put that protocol in place for our cabin crew, and as a consequence of that, we saw the number of reports of fatigue from cabin crew markedly reduced.
So from what to what?
Well, we have had from pilots and cabin crew since the beginning of 2010, we've had 17 reports of fatigue against 76,000 rostered duties. We recognise...
So this includes the pilots or...
That includes pilots.
Yeah.
Within that number, we have 11 reports from cabin crew. We recognise that that's possibly the tip of an iceberg, because the last thing you want to do when you're feeling tired is sit down for half an hour and write a report about it. So we recognise that fatigue is an issue and that we need to do something about it. So we introduced the protocol for the rostering of cabin crew in 2010. We've just concluded the EVA negotiations with our pilots, and that includes a rostering protocol which provides additional layers of protection above and beyond the regulation. So we're committed. We have a just culture.
Sorry, before we go to just culture,
yeah.
What fatigue management systems do you have? FAID is one of them, but the Office of the Transport Safety Regulator in New South Wales is quite critical of the limitations of FAID. And are you familiar with that, Mr. Rees?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad you are. Some other airlines weren't, but so there are criticisms of that, and that Office of Transport Safety Regulator was in relation to, I think, train drivers or all transport operators. So what advice do you get to have the best fatigue management system?
In terms of I'm sorry, Mike, I'm making my answer a little bit long-winded, but in terms of the risk assessment and hazard identification elements of the answer, we use manual processes. So we look at our rosters are produced within the roster protocols. We use manual processes of checking that, basically people sitting down and looking at the rosters and judging whether the output of the rostering system is reasonable on the basis of simple human judgment. So we do not at this present time use any software tools to analyse rosters. We have FAID under consideration. We have SAFE, which is a European-based system under consideration, and a couple of other matters as well. There are airlines in the world that are much further down the track of fatigue management than we are, and are leaders in the field. And to get to the state-of-the-art position in terms...
You're talking about the software, are you?
No, I'm talking about the software being a component... Well, I'm talking about the software being a component part of their fatigue management system. So they use FAID, but they recognise that FAID has limitations, because FAID only considers what a person does when they're at work. It doesn't consider the broader aspects of what might drive fatigue. So, for example, a pilot might have a perfect roster, but he's got 3-year-old twins. So in the state-of-the-art systems, in terms of fatigue management, the fundamental objective is to ensure that the crew member is not fatigued, and that must therefore consider aspects beyond the roster. So they, so if you're moving into this, if you're moving from where we are into a state-of-the-art situation, we need to consult with those organisations to take the best quality, get the best quality advice on where we move to next.
Just following up for that. But if a pilot says, that was a pretty rough route, you know, for whatever reason, that they might have the 3-year-old twins or whatever, do they have to take a sick day, or do you try and accommodate them? Because other airlines other pilots have told me they've had to take sick days off to try and deal with their own fatigue.
This comes to the cultural aspect, and the culture in our organisation is a person who calls in fatigued. They don't phone their manager. They simply phone our operations centre. They tell the operations centre that they're fatigued. They are taken straight away off the roster, and we bring on a substitute. There's no recriminations.
How often does that happen?
Well, we've had 17 reports. So I mean, so we're talking about one and
6 of them air crew.
Correct. And very often, well, sometimes those are events that are reported after the event, if you like. So not each one of those necessarily led to a person coming off the roster, but the policy is very clear that if a crew member is fatigued, they report the fact that they're fatigued prior to the duty. They're removed from the duty. We replace them. We ask them to report the matter, and we carry out an investigation, and there are no recriminations. And so, and sorry, to your point, Senator, sorry, that is not treated as a sick day. It's not treated as, it's just simply they're off the roster.
So just to clarify, did you say 17 was out of 76,000?
Correct.
And perhaps this comes to the model again, is that we only have a couple of overnight flights a day. It's a very small part of the operation. And as I mentioned earlier, the other thing that helps in our type of operation is that there are no night stops away from your base. So everyone is generally flying to and from their home. And they go home and they spend time with their family and they sleep in their own bed. So it's not as disruptive to your sleep patterns as crossing time zones, then checking into a hotel, trying to get some sleep in a hotel.
Going to the bar and...
I wouldn't wish to speculate, Chairman. But
could I? On the back of the clock operation, do you have, like some other airlines, a sort of a snooze protocol for pilots?
On the transcontinental flights.
Well, I mean, we've half an hour for one controlled rest. You don't have that.
We operate with 2 pilots, so I don't think it would be a good idea for our operation.
Well, we could tell you some stories of why it's not.
Oh, that's fine.
You need to tell me which airline.
Yes.
Oh no, if it's an overnight flight, that there's a controlled rest. One of the airlines has a controlled rest where they have pilots have a controlled break of half an hour where we've heard evidence on that. Can I just go to the issue of the show cause notice, because that's obviously something, the reason why Mr. Berry gave evidence a number of weeks ago, but that's the reason why we've a principal reason why you're back here, because the show cause notice, it is unusual to have for an airline to have a major airline to have a show cause notice. It's been put to me that the formalisation of dialogue between an airline and the regulator, the CASA, into a show cause notice may indicate a lack of satisfactory progress in terms of that dialogue between the regulator and the airline. Do you consider that's the case here?
To be honest, I think the dialogue in general has been okay.
Yeah, no, I'd go further. I'd say my knowledge of the interaction is that the dialogue between the airline and CASA has been very good. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Tiger has a very open and robust reporting culture. We do share with the regulator pretty much everything that's going on in the business. We